We are global.
Where do you see the places people
We are
are
global and
connected?
cosmic.
What?
Global and cosmic. I love it. And I see Elizabeth is here. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hey, sorry, I was doing last minute prep.
That's fine. Thank you for taking the mantle of host.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm making the speakers co-hosts so that they will appear at the top here. Is Christopher? Oh, here he is. Okay. Make a co-host. Yes. Just, you guys should appear at the top, I think. Let me check and see. Oops. How did I do that? Okay. Now I have no clue how I did that or how to undo it.
The spotlight?
Yeah. Oh, here, I found it. Okay. Now, is that correct? Are you guys able to see everybody's little video thing?
I can see.
Okay. Okay. Oh boy.
Yeah. People are saying yes in the chat.
Okay.
Which is a good sign.
Okay, good, good. Okay, I'm gonna move this and.
Because if you want, I forget what we did last time, but you can spotlight all the speakers. So it's just always us four. But I think last time we did it, so it switched.
Yeah, I think it should be so the person is talking, but once we do the screen share, I think the person who's talking will pop up, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Whoever's screen is getting shared.
Right, and I've got, Michael, I got your charts pasted into the slideshow for your parents. So I don't know if you're gonna need to share your screen or not, but if you do, we'll switch over.
Okay, good.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to our second astrological magic panel on fixed stars, which I'm really excited about because I wrote a book on fixed stars. So I hope that everybody is really into this topic. I think it's fascinating. Let me introduce our speakers very quickly here. We're going to have Chris Warnock, who has a renaissanceastrology.com site and has been making talismans for many years. We have Michael Ofek, who is a wonderful visitor from overseas and has a long history with publishing and writing in talismanic magic. Clifford Hartley Lowe, who has the Stellar Sorcery Group and lots of other groups where we talk about how to make things and educational opportunities there. And Joshua Proto, who is also working hard and making talismans and being very, very busy with that. I would like to start with having Christopher Warnock give us a little bit about the traditions of fixed star talismans and how that traditional method works.
Yeah, great. I first want to start off by saying that there's not one right approach to take. And, you know, whether you're talking about fixed stars or astrological magic, you know, there's a lot of different approaches. And I think, you know, it's worth listening to, particularly the panelists today. Each of them has, you know, often sort of different things they do themselves. We have commonalities. And what you want to do is, rather than saying, oh, this is right and this is wrong, find the approach that inspires you, find the approach that resonates with you, and go with that. So to start off, I want to talk a little bit about the sort of mainstream medieval Renaissance approach to fixed stars. I mean, what is a fixed star? I mean, I think we're pretty familiar with planets. The name planet comes from planetos, the Greek wanderer, and they move relative to each other. That's how we get aspects. The fixed stars more or less stay fixed and relative to each other. And they're a backdrop that a lot of astronomical observations are done against the stars. They do move slowly due to the precession of equinoxes, about 1 degree every 72 years. And we'll see how that comes into the astrological elections. So there's about 1,000 visible fixed stars, and they're organized traditionally into 48 constellations. So 12 zodiacal constellations, that's where the signs come from, and then 36 extra zodiacal constellations. So in the geocentric astronomy that's used, again, traditionally, we have 7 spheres, starting with the moon that's closest to the Earth, and then Saturn's the furthest away, the 7 planetary spheres. And then above those spheres are either the sphere of the fixed stars or the zodiac. Some of our sources sort of split them up differently. So we have an 8th and a 9th sphere potentially. But those fixed stars are outside the sphere of the planets. They're a long way away. And again, that's one of the, as a practical matter, that's why we use the moon typically in traditional to connect the fixed star to us. In addition, the fixed stars have been often traditionally used for things that last a long time. So if you're electing, for example, a city, you would use a fixed star. Whereas if you're doing a house or something like that, it would be less. You'd use something that's doesn't last as long. So again, with the fixed stars being above the planets, they in fact traditionally considered to rule over the planets. So that's a little bit of confusion. Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos talks about fixed stars being of the nature of planets, and I think that's gotten transmogrified into the idea that somehow the planets rule the fixed stars, when in fact that's the reverse traditionally. So the mainstream traditional method for electing fixed stars is to basically what's happening. If you think about the fixed stars, there are 360 degrees in a 3D globe, as opposed to the planets that are pretty much orbiting on the ecliptic. So what happens with the fixed stars in traditional electional is they get projected onto the ecliptic. And so what we're doing is we're looking at the ecliptic, a sensitive point on the ecliptic, and then electing for that. So we're going to hear some different approaches. Helical rising is different, parens are different, but that is the basic methodology that's used for traditional astrology. And then we usually have those points rising or culminating, and then each of us will talk about our methodology for that. I think that's, at least we can jump in there and say that's, okay, what's a fixed star? We have a little bit better idea of that, and then a little bit better idea of how they fit into the astronomy and astrology of the traditional. And again, like I said, this is not the only way to fly. There's other ways of doing this, but this is kind of how the traditional astrologers did it, and that's kind of what I'm following in with my methodology. So when we talk about my stuff, that's certainly what I follow.
Okay, very good. Now we're going to move on to Clifford, who's going to give us a little bit of information about the Bohemian stars and their relationship and why they are focal and special.
Excellent, excellent. All right. I'm mostly going to be talking about an important magical text called the Quindecim Stellis. What is the Quindecim Stellis? It's the primary source for the creation of fixed star talismans, and it focuses exclusively on the Bohemian stars. The book goes by many names within the text, and it's attributed to Hermes, Enoch, Nyctinebus, and somewhat more plausibly Masha Allah. Scholars call it the Quindecim Stellis because it almost always begins in Latin with something like Incipit Liber Quindecim Stellis. Here begins the Book of the 15 Stars, and so on. It contains the recipes on how to create 15 magical gemstone rings, though some versions are more ambiguous about the form that they are supposed to take. It is one of the shortest grimoires of all. It's 1 or 2 pages in length, which probably explains why it was so widely disseminated. It's easy to copy. For each of the 15 talismans is a corresponding fixed star. At least 1 gemstone is listed, a sigil and or a pictorial image, a list of herbs probably meant to be glued under the ring, and finally a list of powers that the talismans endow upon the wearer. Some versions include electional rules for the creation of talismans, but not all. Some versions include the planetary affinities for each of the stars. The sigils do vary somewhat. The Agrippa and Magus versions are quite different from the rest, and the herbs also vary greatly. Why is the Quindecim Stellis important? It may be one of the oldest writings on elected astrological magic, dating back to about 700 AD or earlier. Following the Ars Notoria, it is the second most popular text of magic in the Middle Ages and Renaissance in the West. It was the most widely distributed and popular text of astrological magic in history. It was especially popular in England, and it was especially popular in the libraries of physicians, probably due to the influence of Marsili Ficino. Marsili Ficino, in his 3 books on life, recommended the adaptation of recipes for talismans into the composition of medicines for patients. It's very possible that the physicians who had this in their library never made a talisman in their lives, but simply used them as guidelines to create medicines for their patients. And it's also important because it popularized the notion of the Bohemian stars. Nobody's quite known what a Bohemian star is, except they appear to be these 15. They are ascribed great power over the centuries and crop up practically everywhere. They even appear in the writings of Aleister Crowley. Now, the Quindecim Stellus as a book, there are 2 variations of its organization. One is 15 chapters organized by star, and there's another form of organization where it's broken up into 4 books by category, such as 1 chapter on herbs, planetary affinities, sigils, and so forth. It has many notable distributions. It appears in Marsili Ficino's 3 books on life, finished in 1489, and several of the Bohemian talismans are mentioned in passing. It appeared in many physicians' libraries, usually accompanied by a copy of De Radiis Stellarum of Al-Kindi. Usually Al-Kindi came first to justify the use of astrological talismans as something natural and not prohibited, supernatural magic, and then it would go right into the 15 fixed star talismans, and then much else beyond that. Many books of magic throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance were omnibuses, which collected together many short texts. Let's see. The most important distribution of the Quindecim Stellus is the Confessio Amantis of John Gower. The title means the lover's confession. It was completed around 1393. It's a 33,000-line poem in Middle English divided into 8 books. It was one of the first major works written in the English vernacular. It was the first English book to be translated into a foreign language. And within a framing story involving an aging lover making a confession to a chaplain of Venus, many stories are told. The theme of the work is moral virtue with the goal of teaching readers virtuous and noble behavior. It was enormously popular, challenging Chaucer's Canterbury Tales for the most popular work of fiction in the English Middle Ages. John Gower, the author, was a friend of Chaucer. Today, it's almost completely forgotten, and it's likely the biggest dissemination of astrological magic in history. In Book 7, the poem recounts the story of the wizard Nyctinebus teaching his pupil, the young Alexander the Great, the structure of the universe and how to make 15 magical rings with which he could conquer the world. Medieval romances dedicated to the life of Alexander the Great replaced his real-life teacher Aristotle with a semi-mythical Egyptian wizard called Nyctinebus or Nyctinebo. This relationship has many parallels with the relationship between King Arthur and Merlin in the Arthurian romances and may actually be its basis. This is an abbreviated form in this text of the Quindecim Stellus, giving the gemstones and herbs and planetary resonances of each of the 15 stars, but no electional rules and only some of their powers. Some versions of the Confessio Amantis include the sigils of the fixed stars and other illustrations. But the most remarkable aspect of this book is that its magical content went unremarked. Yes, John Gower. There's no evidence of any negative reaction by the clergy or public at large. In 1393, astrological magic was mainstream. Another important distribution was the Speculum Lapidum in its 3rd book. The Speculum Lapidum by Camillo Leonardi was an Italian lapidary text. The first 2 books are just plain gemstone lore. The 3rd is all about amulets and talismans. Chapter 18 includes a version of the Quindecim Stellus. Next comes 3 books of occult philosophy by Cornelius Agrippa. Completed around 1510, Agrippa wrote much of it while under house arrest with a very limited library, which may explain some of the variations in his sigils. There are 4 chapters devoted to the Bohemian stars. Book 1, chapter 32 on the herbs and gemstones. Book 1, chapter 47 on the general electional rules and crafting of magical rings. Book 2, chapter 47, the images of the fixed stars, the pictorial images. And Book 2, chapter 52, the sigils or characters of the fixed stars. Finally, the next distribution was the Magus, or the Celestial Intelligencer, published in 1801. Francis Barrett basically plagiarized Agrippa and copied the fixed star lore from Agrippa and distributed it throughout the English-speaking world. All right, the secret of the Bohemian stars. People have speculated wildly about the power and the significance of the Behenian stars or the Beheniae for centuries. One notion that seems to have been popularized by Donald Tyson is that Behen means root or is a type of root in Arabic. And these are the root stars which trickle their power down to the planets along their respective chains of being. The problem is that people fluent in Arabic tell me that Behen does not mean root, it's a fallacy. Now, I stumbled across a paper by Alexander M. Roberts called The Crossing Paths of Greek and Persian Knowledge in the 9th Century Arabic Book of Degrees. That's a very long and boring name, and it's actually a very boring article, except that it has the answer to where the word Behenian probably came from. The word Biabania meant not wandering in ancient Persian, and it was used to distinguish fixed stars from planets in Persian astrological texts. When Persian astronomical and astrological texts were translated into Arabic, this word was shortened to Babani stars rather than translated as fixed for unknown reasons. Gradually, the connotations of Babani came to mean the most important fixed stars because nobody knew what it originally meant. Some forgotten medieval writer picked an arbitrary list of major fixed stars and called them Babani, and this was translated into Latin as Behenae. The reason why only 15 fixed stars were chosen may simply have been the writer ran out of space on the page. It's a very dull solution for an ancient mystery, but it's very plausible.
Do you want me to pop up the images of the manuscript?
Yes, please. This is an intermediate grimoire in terms of the quality of the sigils. They're very similar to the older forms, but they do have some of the traits of what appears in Agrippa. So there may be a slow evolution going on here. My speculation still is that Agrippa was operating under house arrest, had a very limited library, may have been copying these from memory and got a few things wrong. I think these are gorgeous. Yeah. We don't have any idea what these sigils originate from. Some people originally felt that they related to constellations, but nobody's been able to identify the particular constellations. With Regulus up there, you see Beta and Alpha, and those seem to be a reference to the star Regulus, but the rest of it is quite mysterious.
Could I just say something?
Sure.
Cliff, I was going to say, what they kind of look like is like characteres, which come from the Greek, and that form of using sort of circles and lines is a pretty typical way of doing lots of different stuff. So, I think that's, you sort of get the idea maybe it did come from the constellation, but then how it relates,
well,
just like you said.
The reason why we have characters which have circles and lines is that comes from the type of writing implement that was used. It was usually a spike with a sharp end and then a circular end on the other. And that's how they drew, which means that these were probably originally composed on wax tablets or lead sheets. Because that's
the difficzione, like a difficzione kind of situation.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well, the next thing we'd like to discuss here is have Michael talk a bit about using parens as opposed to using longitude, the degree of the star in the zodiac, as opposed to having it in heliocentric longitude or in culmination, the actual position of the star in relation to Earth. Michael, can you take over on this? This is your Talaman Mercury Vega election.
Yeah, I will not use this slide for now, but let's see, maybe I will. Okay, so let's talk about params and heliacal rising. Well, the ancient had many ways of connecting fixed stars to the Earth and to other planets, and there are other points by which the fixed stars were considered to be intensified and more active. So the most common way, of course, is the simple projection on longitudinal degrees on the ecliptic, which is the classical or the most used today. But the earliest connections that the ancients did are really the planets that were co-rising or co-culminating with other stars. So they could be together on the horizon, they could be together culminating on the midheaven. And there are even, I think there were around 4 or 5 different ways to connect fixed stars to the different zodiacs of the ecliptic. One of them, as I said, is the projection of the co-rising, or when the star is really crossing the horizon of the place where you are at, and the projection of that degree to the ecliptic would be the connection. So if there was a planet there, he would have risen together, and that's a paran or paratelonta in Greek, which is really co-rising. There are also other projection methods using the allylical rising of a star. So when he was allylically rising, the projection of that degree would be important. And of course, I talked about the meridian, either culminating or anti-culminating, were also connection. And then there was like a mix and match kind of connection, which means that a planet would rise and a fixed star would culminate, so that would consider to be a connection or kind of a mundane aspect. But these were, at least in natal charts, they were not only taken for the event of that happening. They were taken for the potential of that event happening in 24 hours of the birth. So if the planet and the star, or even 2 planets, are in paran relationship, it means that when one will rise, the other will culminate. But they don't have to be in that place at the birth time. So they maintain that relationship even though they're not on the angles per se at that moment. But when we're doing talismans, we do want them to be, on the angles. So this is the way the Greeks and the Babylonians did this. And I want to show you, can I share my screen for a second?
Yes, you should be able to. I gave you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
All right, good. Okay. But this is the example I was thinking about. This is the true phase, the true rising, which really means it's which is a kind of a paradox, because true phase means something that is visible or becoming an appearance. And here, a planet in its true phase is in the most, the most unvisible place. This is the true phase of Sirius. So we see the projection of Sirius to the 15th degree, to the 40th, 15th degree really of Sirius here in Cancer. But really what we're seeing, what is happening, this is the celestial sphere, and we see the sun on the horizon, and we see Sirius rising parallel to the sun. Okay? It's not really at the exact moment, because you can move around a little bit with the orb if you want to get the moon in a good place. So you have a little bit of wiggling room. But essentially what's happening here is that the sun and Sirius are both rising together at the horizon, and this is the true phase of Sirius, which is incredibly powerful in practice. And this is something I experimented with a lot with many fixed stars. And of course, the allylical rising itself, which I'll show later in other, my English kind of come ups and drops, so I'm sorry about that. And then there's the Tuliman, where is it? I'll show you this.
Up to.
This one. Okay, so this is the zodiacal projection of Tuliman or Bungula, which is really on the, we don't see it in our latitudes. Most of it, you need to be below 25, I think, north to see it, which is a very bright star of Alpha Centauri. It's the alpha of the constellation Centaurus. So we see this Mercury rising with the projected degree of Bungula, but if we want to see where Bungula or Toliman, which is the same star, really is. Yes. So, excuse me while I find it. Here it is, okay? So, the degree that we're looking at arriving is the projection of Tuliman onto the ecliptical degrees. But Tuliman himself is invisible. It doesn't mean that this doesn't have an effect. It does, and that is shown in practice. But it has a different relationship. When it projected into the ecliptic, it's a kind of a relationship with the sun, or with the solar cycle. And when it rises by himself or rises in Paranti, another planet, then it's really touching the horizon and, in a sense, activating its powers in that way. Now, if you look at the other side, we'll see that Mercury is co-rising with Vega. So this is, in a sense, a kind of horizontal conjunction. Every fixed star that is close to the horizon is, in a sense, in a conjunction, according to the ancients. And again, any fixed star that is connected to the MC, that is the meridian, is also in conjunction. So one can be rising and one can be culminating. And if they do that at the same time, this is a Paran relation. So even though on the chart, we see the rising of Bungula, it's really physically the rising of Vega, which is projected to 15 degrees of Capricorn. So, can I show another thing? Do I have like 1 more minute?
Sure.
Okay. Where is it? Yes, it's this one. I don't see it in the share. Why not? Sorry. Here it is. Okay. This is, I can't get into all these phases, but this is another thing completely. It's not really another thing completely, but it's another perspective. This is the phases of the fixed stars, which is another thing that should be taken into account, at least theoretically, or was taken into account in many other astrological things that the ancients would do with this. So in a sense, it's a kind of the life of the star. The star, with the conjunction of the sun, in a sense, is revitalized, is reborn, and then he had that first life rising, which is really the appearance, the reborn into external reality. And then, in a sense, it does the whole cycle, which I don't think I have much time to go into details. But this phase is maybe the most powerful and intense, because here the star is very young and full of vigor. And the Alaical rising was a very prominent testimony astrologically, and very powerful wave of that star's energy. But the more he increased as the sun was going forward, then he would get into the highest place on the midheaven, when the sun was rising. And this paran was really powerful. That star was cutting the sky into half, in a sense, just before the sun would rise. So what I'm saying here, and I'm trying to do it very short, it's really, really challenging, is that we have the Paran relationship, which could be planets, different planets and stars, and we have the sun and stars relationship, which really is what gives us the phases of the fixed star. And different phases have different quality according to the ancient tradition and according to Ptolemy. So we should, at least theoretically, and I do, not all the time, but most of the time, look at the phase of the fixed star in which we are invoking and making a talisman of. And if it's after the Eliacal phase, all through until the evening rising, then it's the most powerful. It doesn't mean that the other side is not powerful. It's in a sense more internalized. It's kind of, if it's a life cycle, this is the youth, and this is most powerful in the sense of life energy and externalized manifestation. And this is more like old age, more wise, more internalized, more deep. So this is a kind of more, in a sense, more nocturnal or more psychologically oriented. All right, so that was kind of fast and intense. I hope you got
yeah, right.
You got the point.
Good.
That's excellent. That's a really great graphic. Thank you. That was wonderful. If you're finished, why don't you end your screen share and we'll get back to, oh, where'd my, oh, here we go, screen share. Here we go. Share that. Now we're going to open up the floor for some questions, and we'll start with a question that deals with kind of the basis of fixed stars and how people are working with them, particularly the philosophical basis for performing fixed star talisman rituals and any other type of celestial based talisman. So who or what are you evoking, and what energy are you drawing from stars in particular, but even with any other celestial body that you're working with? What's your philosophy for doing this? Let me start with Christopher and ask him how he kind of bases his philosophical thinking around talismans.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would say my approach is devotional. So that when I think of any celestial factor, whether it's a planet or a fixed star or mansion of the moon, essentially what I'm doing is interacting with the angel of that planet. Now, I think there's probably an almost infinite number of spirits associated with each factor. So I think you can also interface at different levels. So my focus is on interfacing sort of at an angelic or archangelic level. And what I'm looking for is a long-term relationship. So you might say the magical approach, which again, totally valid approach. It's, in fact, probably even more mainstream than what I do, is to say, okay, I want some stuff and I'm going to do that to get this particular effect. And that when I do an election, it's got certain things in it to get this. And if I don't get that particular effect or stuff, then it's sort of a failure. I still, with my talismans, you can see they do have an effect. I mean, you can look at my website. We've got testimonials. I got 70 pages of people's testimonials. So they clearly do have an effect, and I've had the personal effects with them. But really, my focus is more on having a long-term relationship with these particular celestial spirits. When I, for example, do a daily planetary invocation, and I'm more, interested in attunement, and then it's not to say, again, it doesn't have a long-term effect. I mean, I'm healthy, got a great marriage, I have a great middle-class lifestyle, a lot of which I attribute to it. But my focus, like I said, is more on that long-term relationship with the spirits. And again, it's more spirit than energy. So I less think of a talisman as sort of a battery with energy in it, which is perfectly valid way to look at it, and more of a talisman as a portal or sort of a focal point for then communication with that spirit. And so then when you're doing a reconsecration or an additional consecration, what you're doing is sort of invoking that spirit and kind of keeping that relationship strong. So like calling up a friend and making sure that you check in with them so often. So again, that's sort of my approach. That's what I've been pulled to over the years. And it's just one of the many possibilities as far as how people do it. In terms of the talisman making, I'm following essentially from either Agrippa and Ficino, which says, okay, put that fixed star again, as Michael was saying, the projected point, either rising or culminating, and then the moon applying to a conjunction, sextile, or trine. And that's sort of the basic recipe. And then Cliff and I think of similarities. I think Joshua as well have on all sorts of different ways of going about doing those types of elections. And so, and that's, like I said, that's basically my approach, and then my my methodology in terms of how I would time it. And you can do more than just make talismans. I think we'll get into that later. I mean, those elections are opportunities for a wide variety of interactions. So I think that's how it basically fixed stars. And I also am getting interested in constellations, and I'll probably do a constellation example if we get to that. But that's my approach. Like I said, I would call it devotional. I'm more like consider myself a celestial priest. At the same time, I do produce a whole lot of talismans, and which for people to use, for specific effects.
Okay, well, let's bounce to who wants to speak next. Clifford, do you want to talk next, or you want Michael?
I can talk next, because
Okay.
a lot of my work in this area specifically is very similar to Chris's, so it's a good way to ride on his coattails for a great introduction. The initiatic qualities of the Bohemian stars in particular are very important to me. I've made a personal project to create all 15 rings as an initiation process. This is a bit UPG, but it does have a solid basis in the Corpus Hermeticum, with particular the discourse on the eighth. There's an idea in Hermeticism overall that you elevate your spirit going up the planetary hierarchy, up the fixed star hierarchy, and finally into the realm of the faces and unity with the one. And this is a part of my process of gradually ascending towards unity with divinity. Let's see. I would like it to catch on the idea that we should all of us create 15 of these rings or talismans, because they're very useful and they're very fun, and they're transformative to the psyche and the spirit. Let's see. I do realize that we've discovered that the list of Bohemian stars is a bit arbitrary, but for me, this is more of a connection to the history of that particular grimoire rather than the whole of the eighth sphere. These are the best guiding information, guiding lights to lead us towards the wholeness of the eighth sphere, because frankly, the stellar lore that we have for other fixed stars are relatively sparse. I believe that each of these Bohemian stars, and probably all of the fixed stars, have a celestial court and hierarchy similar to those of the 7 traditional planets. Just like the 7 traditional planets have a ruler or archangel which governs it, with many subordinate entities, I believe that each of the fixed stars has an equally populous and powerful group of entities that you can communicate with and develop a relationship with. And that's actually what I often do with my fixed star talismans. More frequently than asking for material benefits, I usually put on one of these talismans, and during an election for the fixed stars, which are not quite good enough to make a talisman, I will attempt to communicate with them and ask a favor, and usually that favor is for the star to reveal its secrets to me in dreams or by other means of communication. Let's see. These entities are personifications of natural order. They are angels or the close cousins of angels. They're not demons. They're not the spirits of the dead. They are benevolent, but the fixed star entities are kind of alien. We can all relate to an aspect of the planetary hierarchy because they usually are related to emotions or people that we can meet in our lives. Saturn would be an old person, or Mars would be a warrior or an angry person, and so forth and so on. The Bohemian stars are much more abstract and strange. They're almost Lovecraftian at times, but without the destructive qualities most of the time. Let's see. And with each petition I make, and with each creation of a new Bohemian fixed star ring, I believe that I'm being initiated into their individual court to a greater degree. So that as I work with planetary magic or fixed star magic or even the decans, I feel that each time I interact with them, I'm getting to know them better and they're getting to change me for the better. And so this is my spiritual path really does focus a lot more on the fixed stars than even the planets and the decans. And that's why my first lecture on astrological magic focused upon the Quindecim Stellis. And I'm glad that I can return to this topic after, I guess, 10 years now.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat box from Amina that she asks, following from the question of timing, about how often do you spend time linking with the spirits of the fixed star? I mean, like you were talking about non-talismanic elections. How often are you reconnecting with those talismanic entities that you've?
Well, it varies on the available elections per year, but for the fixed star that I work with the most, at least 3 times a year.
Okay.
And there's some that I haven't made the talismans for yet. Which ones are those? Capella and Alcade. Those are the 2 I haven't made yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't had strong interactions with those, though I do have Spica talismans and Alcade talismans that I bought from Chris. So I have some relationship with them, but I rarely put in those. I rarely communicate with those.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, go ahead.
I've got the Bohemian Star table up here, and at the bottom there's a list of angel names. Now, we discussed this a little bit because angel names can change from resource to resource.
Right. This is a relatively recent discovery made by Mihai Vartaraju, who has an amazing blog that everybody should be looking at, where he basically copies old grimoire texts from many different traditions, but sometimes crosses over into astrological magic. This is from the Necromantic and Miscellany Heidelberg CPG 263. And it has a list of angel names for the fixed stars of the Bohemians. The thing is that this is a new discovery. Nobody, as far as I know, has actually used these in the construction of talismans, and they don't appear to be necessary. There is an alternate name for the ruler of the Pleiades, which appears in the PGM. It's Zizaubia. And while I've used that in invocations, I've never used that engraved on a Pleiades ring. And it doesn't appear to be necessary. Frankly, the elections for fixed stars using the rules that Chris and I work with are really short. So you can only make maybe 3 or 4 rings if you're engraving rings at a time. And with Chris, who's casting, you still have a very narrow window. And as such, basically cluttering up the rings just makes fewer rings available to be made.
Okay.
You know, I was going to say, Cliff, I thought this was, immediately went and looked at this manuscript online to look at the original. And I was really I thought this was amazing. What I think I'm going to do with this is probably do some meditation on it and then do some divination and then see what comes back with that. But I think this is a really incredible resource. And this is just so typical of like, I was going to say, I loved your whole thing. I just, everything you said, I was really very in tune with that. And I just think this is an amazing resource. And what's exciting about the fixed stars is so much of this new stuff is coming out. We're discovering these manuscripts and we're expanding because we really kind of have the skeleton right now. I mean, the 15 fixed stars kind of gives us the skeleton of the practice. And again, there's more fixed stars. I think every fixed star could potentially be contacted. But the great thing about the 15 fixed stars is we have all this information. And so I just think I was so happy with that when you shared that. And I'm going to thank you publicly for putting that out there because it's so cool to have this available.
So what about the sigils? Now, I picked up the Agrippa ones, and this is just on Wikipedia. But to the right, there's also, Chris, from your page, these sigils from Hermes. And they're very similar but not identical. We have these for the Bohemian stars, but what about other stars?
Yeah, I think, what I think, and Cliff has said this before, so you can use whichever ones you want. You know what I mean? I kind of like the Agrippa because they're very regular, but that's an aesthetic preference. And I think, as Cliff was saying as well, the stars will respond to different names, different sigils, And these are from traditional sources. We can, they're usable. So you kind of have to find the one that resonates with you. And it's funny because Nigel Jackson, who's done artwork for me, he'll use multiple things. He'll use like Agrippa and mix them in, and he'll have a beautiful image that's got all sorts of different sigils and stuff added into it. And I think that that's, again, another way that Cliff and I approaches are similar. They're like, he was saying, we were talking about, Picatrix use lots of names. These entities respond to lots. If you do a lot of names, they like that. And so I think that it's really your preference as far as it. But there's a lot. Every one of these was in a manuscript. So you've got many different manuscripts. You have lots of different variations, and we're discovering new ones as we go along. It's really quite exciting.
Joshua, how does your practice relate or differ in that respect with the angel names and sigils and whatnot?
Sure, definitely. I think in the very beginning, the fixed star talismans that I made were some of the first ones to actually go really well, and they're actually very rare elections. But being early into it and naive, I didn't really realize how precious of a thing I actually found, which is really cute to look back on. But I very much when I'm looking for elections and making them now, I think my cosmology is very similar in the sense of, these are spirits that I'm interacting with outside of the sort of regular 7 planetary sphere. And in my experience, they have been a bit alien, a bit interesting. They don't feel the same. And I will also say that I found some very interesting prayers that touch on what I believe are the spirits of the fixed stars in some certain tantric texts from the Lalita Vajra and Ro lineage, where they build out this Kamal. It's specifically a prayer to the protectors, and they build this cosmology out of like all the beings of the earth that are situated there, and then all the beings of the grahas, and then all the beings of the nakshatras of all the lunar mansions, and they're like, and way out beyond there, beyond farther of all these areas, there are these beings, and I think in a Buddhist sense, they sometimes see if there anything that is exerting influence on you that isn't yourself or your true vision or non-dualistic mind, it's sort of clouding your perception. So their perspective of those entities, is just another thing that's influencing you. They didn't have a lot of great things to say about them. However, they understood that they were part of the cosmology. We're all tied up in this world together, and help us all seek liberation together. So I found that very interesting. I don't have I would say a negative perspective of the fixed stars and their spirits myself. I think they're all different allies and things to honor and things to develop a relationship with, either to try to get something if that's your goal, but also I think for me is just to develop a relationship with this world that we have. Like, what a blessing to be a human and to be able to do these things. They say human life is very precious, and to me this is like a living example of that, of every moment. And when I'm making a talisman, it has to be very sparse, just using some of these sigils. I played around with some of the Agrippa versus Quindecum Stellis sigils, and they both work fine. I wouldn't let that be the thing that prevents you from jumping in. So that's how I sort of see it.
Michael, what about you? What are you working on in terms of, your stars or celestial talismans? And then what about your evocations? How do you differ from the other 3 guys?
Well, first, I would like to say a couple of cosmological remarks that I made. Some maybe who followed my work know that many years of research in the reconstruction of ancient Greco-Egyptian astrology, I got to the conclusion that most of it, is based on the model of light and dark relationship, reflection, seeing, aspect, etc. So light and visibility played a very strong role in ancient times, and you can see it in ancient examples. The phases of the planets rising lightly, etc., were really very important. So taking that as a kind of a guide, looking at the stars and looking at them as generating light, like our sun, and most of them are sun, um, is kind of the difference for me, because planets are more reflective of the solar light in our system, and the stars are generative causes. They're really powerful light sources on their own, and they, in some sense, they are external to our system, so they bring something very unique. But in another way, they filter through our system, so they have to work through the powers that control things down here. So they are filtered through the planetary natures in some way. But I think they share in the same light source, in the essence. So there are kind of typecasts of different complexes or mixes of those qualities of potency, but very active in their own way. And if you can put the cosmologically, the nested spheres thing, picture.
That one?
Yeah, that will suffice. So some of them can you can see different kinds of these, but this is a good example, because here we see the pyramid with the fixed star lower than the signs. This is the crystalline ninth sphere, which is there to help with the precession. And this is the primum mobile, the unmoved mover. And in a sense, in the more Platonic or Neoplatonic sense, the signs are above the fixed star. At least this is my view. And I think that was the view. And I have other cosmological pictures like that, putting the fixed stars below the signs, because the signs are not physical. The signs are essence. They are light spectrum changing in relationship with the sun and the earth, which is the most fixed relationship, really. So this is more what Plato meant by the cycle of the same than the fixed stars themselves, which really are not really fixed. For us, they are, for all intents and purposes, they're pretty fixed. But there's a slippage from the ideal, which is the realm of the ideas, the forms, the essences, which the sign reflect, and that slippage between the cycle of the fixed stars, which are really physical, and in that sense, kind of a lower expression of these essences. So I see them, in a sense, as kind of mediating the essence power of the signs, just in a sense differently, but in a sense a bit like planets do that. But again, planets do not emit lights of their own. They're not so powerful and distinct and active in the same way that stars are. So this is really, in a nutshell, my view of them. And I don't really use too much of the names and in the invocations. A wise man once told me, prayers are for skeptics. And I love this, because in a sense, what I think we're trying to do is really connect to that essence which we share with them. So in a sense, it's directing my being, my psyche, my mental capacities into that planet, into that star, in the way I perceive it. And of course, we use, what we get from ancient sources, but there's no replacement for direct experience. And direct experience should be, at least from my perspective, should be direct. You should see the star. You should in some way interact with it, at least to make that first connection. So in a sense, we can look at it as a hierarchy of spiritual beings and put them very high in that hierarchy, probably. Plato put the souls of men coming from different stars. So it's like the typecast, the warrior, the preacher, the priest, whatever, many typecasts of potential incarnations, in a sense, exist in the fixed stars. So I would just end this by saying that, well, I'll just give another analogy and then I'll end this. I see this the recognition of the fixed stars in the sense like recognition of higher spheres inside our own mind, in a sense. There are like neural connections in the gigantic brain of the cosmos, like exons of information. And in a sense, when we expand our connection to them, we expand our awareness. We really engage in very, very deep seeds of ideas, in a sense. And their geometrical and numeral kind of level, if you look at it in a Platonic or Neoplatonic sense, which is their orderings and their movements, etc. So it's a kind of a exercise in expanding your awareness. And when you're aware of that star, in a sense, that reflective mirror in your mind is kind of lighting up, and you're aware of that certain taste and flavor, and you can access it and expand it. And this is the, in a sense, one way that I describe my practice, I guess.
Well, I know that I've had other discussions with other astrological magicians who work with stars, and the point is that you've got the planets are all very close to Earth, but the stars are closer to God or the cosmic creator. So when you look at this, diagram of the spheres, it really makes it very clear that the stars are an outer ring of connection to the cosmic creator or the prima mobile, and whereas the planets are so much closer to us, there is a differentiated relationship there.
Yes, and I would say just one more thing. I would say one can connect to a star at any time. I think of that also with planets, really. What we do when we do elections is looking for that contact point, when the signal is most high, for us to make that contact powerful and then raise the volume of that signal and connect to that star. So in that sense, at least from my point of view, there's no need to get into deep nitpicking in elections, in a sense. It is the thing that you, as the magician, focus on to draw in. And the more intensely you focus on that and know how to activate that, the more powerful it will become. So in a sense, you need to see elections as like pulling a string of something, and then music, if it plays stronger in that moment, then there's a higher access point to draw it in and consecrate it and make a talisman out of it, or do things that are not talismans, which we'll talk about later.
Yes, well, Jeffrey Kotick has remarked here that in Zoroastrian theology, fixed stars were benevolent owing to their orderly movement, whereas planets were disorderly and more demonic entities. So there's a little qualitative difference between planet talismans and fixed star talismans in that respect, because the planets appear to move.
Yes.
Do any of you
The only thing really unchanging and order preserving is the relationship of the Earth to the Sun.
Yeah. I think one thing to think about is the fact that the celestial everything is a system, right? And that everything, that's a great thing about astrology, is we're looking at this entire system of things in which the planets, the fixed stars, the mansions all fit together in these incredible cycles. So it's useful to think of them individually, right? And I think when you're talking about the planets being demonic or whatever, the planets and the fixed star, everything has a good side and a bad side and a neutral side, has an infinite levels of gray. And again, you can interact with them in all sorts of different ways. So what's amazing about astrology and traditional astrology is this idea that this was a language for the complete description of reality. And that anything that happens in reality can be described astrologically because it's a complete system. So we just have to be careful in looking at the pieces, not to lose sight of the fact that there's a complete whole and the incredible cycles and orders that take place in that. And I think I really liked Michael's comment about you can contact the stars anytime. It's true, though it's like calling up a friend at 3 o'clock in the morning. You may not get the best response if you're not. No, they'll wake up and talk to you, but to me, it's almost a question of respect, as far as the timing as well as the power. But I think that's important to think of this as like there's an incredible system here. This whole clockwork universe is kind of one way of thinking about it. But for me, it's full of life. It's full of spirit. And again, that's just one way of looking at. And we're getting some really interesting, different approaches, which I think is great. It's really fascinating to hear how people approach this. And I've really been enjoying everybody's take on it, and I'm learning something from everybody as well.
Clifford, what's the difference for you between planet talismans and fixed stars?
Okay, I derive most of my ideas about that from Picatrix, which doesn't come out and directly say anything, but implies quite a bit. Let's see. It advises that you should use a talisman of a planet to bless a home, but a talisman of a fixed star to bless a city. And that's probably because homes last maybe a couple of generations, especially in the ancient world at most, and cities may last thousands upon thousands of years. Later on, it describes an optimal talismanic configuration where a planet is conjoining a compatible fixed star. And it says that the planet imparts vigor and power, and the fixed star longevity and durability. Okay. So what we derive from this is the idea that planetary talismans act very powerfully and quickly, but may last 40 years, maybe a single lifetime. But a fixed star talisman may operate a little bit slowly, but it could potentially last thousands of years. And that's the difference as far as I can tell. Of course, I can't live 1,000 years and verify this in experiments, but I'll take the authority of the word for this.
Good. Okay, well, let's move on to our astrological priorities in elections. Okay, I'm going to move to Joshua submitted a Regulus talisman election for Regulus, and I can see in this chart that the moon is conjunct Regulus on the midheaven. Would you like to take a spin there, Joshua?
Yes, I definitely can. This is one I made this year, and is all of some of the best selection I've ever found. I wasn't necessarily looking for it when I stumbled across it. It sort of came as I was looking for other things, as these things sort of pop up. In that sort of way, I think, when I talk to people, in consultations, or if I'm tutoring someone, I'll give them a peek at, I think I have like 16 or 22 factors that I will be very, particular about, of making sure I hit, or at least aspirationally trying to hit, because the real thing is as someone who is practicing this a lot over and over, there's no such thing as a perfect election. And you're always going to be making compromises. This one was really interesting because this is one that I was just very happy about. I think this is one of the ones where it's like, oh, I'm making the least amount of compromises I could pretty much find. So this one is a Regulus talisman. Moon is conjunct on the midheaven, and I think it ends up being like what is it, like a 50-minute orb on Regulus, so the conjunction is not as tight as I would prefer it to be. I'm really wanting a nice tight conjunction, and this was also a little bit out of sign, so that also could be something that one may not desire. However, the moon is like incredibly fast in this election. I think it's going like 14 degrees a minute. And then I also like to look at, well, what's the Lord of the Moon? What's the condition of the Lord of the Moon in this instance? Moon is in Leo. Sun is ruler of Leo. Sun is in Leo. Amazing. I love it. And then the sun is not blowing the moon up in combustion. So I also love that as well. So there's far enough space that it's not even within the beams. And I really enjoy that. And even though it may not necessarily be as important, I also like to optimize the quality of the ascendant ruler. Mostly because I see, I see the ascendant, as a significator of the main talisman bearer, or the purpose of the talisman. If that is strong and fortified, then we have a better chance for it to succeed. So ascendant ruler of the Scorpio rising is Mars. It is in Aries, highly dignified, in a 5th house, which is, considered a fortunate house. And I think that is just a really interesting particular configuration to have there. And then this is also kind of special for my own personal natal chart. So I saw this, and I think, some people may be hesitant to have like a Scorpio rising election with Mars so highly powerful, but I wanted to give it a shot, and I'm very glad I did. This is definitely one of the most potent fixed star talismans I've made, and overall I think the favorite one that I've made this year.
Good. Let's move on to Clifford. This is a Pleiades talisman from 2017.
Okay, this actually, let me see. This is the one I thought.
You gave me two. I hope I didn't flip them around.
No, it's okay. Let's see. There was one I sent you by accident. It's the wrong one, but oh, this is the better one. This is the better one. This is the most recent Pleiades talisman that I made. It's awesome. It's really powerful. You have the moon making a application within 3 degrees of Alcyone on the midheaven. I prefer midheaven elections over ascendant based fixed star elections because Picatrix in one section forbids putting the moon on the ascendant. And it contradicts it elsewhere, but I find that I have better results with my fixed star talismans if I operate strictly with the midheaven. You have Virgo rising, and let's see, how is Mercury doing there? It's peregrine, but it's otherwise fine. But the most interesting thing about this election, I think, is that you have the North Node on the ascendant. The North Node is generally understood to function like a benefic, and Picatrix really loves the idea of putting a benefic on the ascendant. It improves all elections and grants it enormous power. The North Node is not exactly a benefic. You need to have other powerful factors in that election to fortify it, because otherwise it will be unstable. But here you have the moon being extremely fast, and I think that functions in that manner. Let's see, the moon is just past Algol. It's ruled by Venus. Where's Venus? Venus is in the 8th house. Picatrix doesn't like having the moon sign ruler be cadent. It says that it foretells a bad ending even if there's a good beginning. And even though the 8th house is a malefic house, it's not cadent, so we don't have to worry about that here. These talismans turned out fantastically well. I made 4 of these, and they may be my most favorite talisman of all. And they're great. The only thing that's awry here, and it didn't seem to have any notable effects, is that the moon is separating from a trine of Mercury, and Mercury is the lord of the first. Usually that's an indication of something happening in the past, and you don't want to have that in an election, because it's like being pulled in 2 different directions. There's a story being told about the future, but it's also a story being told about the past, and that should diminish the efficacy of the talisman. But with so much else good in this election, the result was phenomenal. There is no such thing as a perfect election after all. So yeah, that's
what are the usefulness of a Pleiades election? What are those supposed to evoke?
Oh my God, Pleiades is one of the most versatile talismans, and I'll be talking about this more later on. Let me find the actual text. Hold on. Until I find it, I can do that mostly from memory. Oh, here it is. The Ring of the Pleiades preserves eyesight, summons demons and spirits of the dead, calls the winds, and reveals secrets and things that are lost. And because, I'll bring this up later, because I had to use a substitution for this, it didn't summon demons or the dead, but all the other powers in great abundance. Amazing, amazing talisman that I recommend for everybody. And I will be talking about that later too.
Okay, well, we'll move on. Here's Christopher's Aldebaran talisman.
Maybe, are we gonna have a time to do a lot, or should I? I'm just gonna say.
Well, let's keep moving, but we've got a lot of charts. But go ahead and.
Why don't we just do Draco? Why don't you switch to that one?
Okay. Sirius Ptolemy. I think I had Draco for question number 5.
All right, we'll go back to Aldebaran then. Okay, I just want to make a couple preliminary comments. I don't look at as many factors for my elections, and so what happens is sometimes people will look at sort of Cliff or Joshua style and say, okay, well, they did all this, you didn't, so you suck. And so I think it's important to step up and say, look, if you're going to look at the ascendant, you could say, okay, don't look at the 8th house, that's bad. Essentially what we're doing is going through and making some decisions about what we're going to put in and what we're going to leave out. But to a certain extent, that decision is going to be a little arbitrary or subjective. So, and it's also going to depend on what you find is useful for you. So I think that one of the key things to take away from this is to say, okay, this is my practice. These are the things that I find are important, but to not turn around and then go after somebody else's stuff and say, I don't like this, because I could look at any chart and find 500 things wrong with it. No matter what the chart was, you could just rip on that chart as far as that, because an election is essentially, this chart is a little slice of reality. And when is reality ever perfect? So what we're doing is essentially, I think, going back to Michael's comment, you could contact the star at any time. So let's find a time that's appropriate for them, but then how you're going to put the factors together and how you're going to decide that is going to differ depending on the person, and people have a different take on it. And also there's a lot of fear. I mean, frankly, you can get worried about, oh my gosh, the moon is this way, and oh my God, my head's going to explode, when in fact that doesn't happen. So, when I do a fixed star election, the focus I have is I'm going back to the, what Ficino and Agrippa say, which is you need to have that connection with the moon. I mean, that applying aspect of the moon is a really key thing, because again, we're talking about this further sphere. The moon is the closest planet to us, rules the sublunary sphere, brings the influences, other celestial influences to us. So that's why we connect to the moon. And then we have, so you can do a conjunction, a sextile or trine. I kind of prefer conjunction, but it's also fine to do sextile or trine. And then a rising or culminating. And again, there's some controversy about that. The whole, whether it's problematic to have the moon in the ascendant, I haven't found that to be a problem. That comes from electional stuff where the moon makes things happen quickly. If you don't want it to end quickly, Ramsey, for example, says that. But again, even Picatrix says for all the moon talismans have the moon rising. So obviously that couldn't necessarily be, again, instant death. So what we're coming down to, again, is a preference. And so I will do both culminating or rising. And then what I want to make sure is that the moon and the fixed star are not afflicted. So the moon isn't combust, it's not in detriment or fall, it's not making applying a square or opposition or a conjunction to a malefic or afflicted planet. So I have a little bit less rigorous, but that means I can do more elections. I mean, if you have 20 factors that you're looking for and you have to have those 20 factors, you may not be able to ever make that fixed star talisman for a couple years. So that's just something to keep in terms of a practicality. And then my experience is that you can make, using this methodology, with the say 5 factors that I'm using, and you can come up with very powerful talismans. So the most important thing is to say, look, I have my method, it works for me, but I'm not going to turn around and stomp on anybody else's. And just because I do it this way doesn't mean that someone else does they're wrong. So Aldebaran is a very interesting talisman. This is the Eye of Taurus. It's a big red star, very bright. And this is an excellent talisman for wealth and honor. And so again, you can see a picture of the design here of the talisman, and these, I designed it, I did the time, and then they're made for me by my student in Pakistan, Muhammad Ajmal. And these are, again, put in, this is my plug, as Elizabeth started out with her book. These talismans are available on my website, and we'll step away from that. So I'm really happy with Aldebaran. It's a nice talisman to make for wealth. Fixed stars don't always do, there's not a ton of wealth talismans for fixed stars, and that's obviously a very popular goal. These have been very popular talismans, and people have been happy with them and the results.
Good, good. Okay, let's move to the next. This is Michael's Sirius talisman, and you showed that to us with parents, but we're getting into more of what are these for and how were the results of this talisman? Your microphone is off. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. I want to go over some of the points of what I use and how I elect those charts. So a couple of very basic points, and then I'll go to that chart. So first of all, the brighter, the stronger. And the closest to the proximity to the ecliptic will most of the time just be much more effective. And then you don't even need to bother with parans. It's the conjunction is a paran in most of the royal stars, at least. Now, I use the ascendant, the moon, and the MC, and I also use the sun, as you've seen. It's true that the moon is the most renowned translator of the heavens, and it's very important. But in this context, I kind of I blow the horn of the Paran stuff. So you asked me to put more exotic kind of examples, because I also use the very basic moon star ascendant or MC. I do prefer the MC for the moon. So as I said, you can use the sun and you can use the true phase, which I showed you before. Now, I don't allow any aspect except conjunction. I think that you may say that you can allow aspects maybe to the stars which are on the ecliptic, but at least in my intuition, it feels a little less powerful. So I limit myself to the conjunction. The average orbs are around 2 to 3 degrees for the conjunction, but I think you can increase the orb as the magnitude of the planet is bigger. And the lower magnitude, you can take a more smaller orb. As I said, the main translator is the moon, but also the sun. And you can use also other planets, mainly the planets that are connected to that planetary nature of the star. So if there's a Venus there, you can put Venus as that translator of that star. If you can add the moon, that's even better. If you can add another Paran, that's even better. So the more the merrier. And of course, it's a bonus if you also get the planetary hour lord also ruling the hour. And by the way, if you have fixed stars which are a combination of Venus, Mercury, let's say, depending on your source, different sources, different thing. So if you put the Mercury, that will increase the mercurial aspect of that star. If you put the Venus one, it will increase the Venusian aspect of that star. So that's interesting thing to know. Like Chris, I put the moon conjunct the star, either on the ascendant or the MC, free from malefic aspects, etc. Or you can put the moon in a Parana star, either together on the ascendant or the MC, or one in each. That's another way to connect them. And it's a good thing to look at the planets which carry the nature of that star, that they are in dignified places. That's not always, you don't always get that. But if you do, that I think would increase their filtering the energy in a better way. I think one should always check the star phase. Star phases, the younger phases I showed you before, are the most vigorous and powerful for external manifestation, at least for sure. And on the other side, they are more internalized and in some way more psychological, like more internalized kind of essences of internal powers, which is also true for the sun true phase conjunction. Okay, let me stop here and just talk about this example. So what you see here really, if I would show you this on my software, I could show you the globe, and what you see, you would see that Sirius is on the horizon. And he's making his first appearance after a long time of disappearance. And this first appearance is like a flickering kind of energy. If you witnessed it, you know what I mean. It's very powerful. It's the first day when he's visible, and then the sun rises and he disappears. But this is kind of the
Starbirth.
Very powerful. What?
Starbirth.
A starbirth, exactly.
Yes.
So then he's become known, he's apparent, he's visible. So he's in a place to say something about that moment and the beginnings in that moment. And so here we see, just that Sirius, as I said, is on the horizon. And the moon is pretty close to Jupiter here, which is pretty nice. It's in the fifth house sign. So generally, you don't get very ideal charts when you have Sirius rising. You have it once a year. You have kind of a day or two of a wiggle room. But when you get something like this, this is very, very beautiful. It's not every day that you have, the moon conjunction in Sagittarius, even though Jupiter is retrograde, is also trine the sun. So there's a lot of nice things in this election. And what else? Yeah, maybe that's it for now. I don't know.
Okay, let's move
I can
on.
continue, but I'm always conscious about the time. So
Right, yeah, let's just keep moving. This was
All right.
your election with
Ah.
Ptolemy Sun Jupiter. And this has different
Okay.
qualities because, you're moving it to the top, yes? You're moving it to
Right.
culminating?
Right. Mind you, this is not, as each of us said, this is not an ideal election, right? You see the moon applying to a square with Saturn, even though Saturn is dignified. That's not would be my first choice, but I couldn't wait 12 years for Jupiter to reach that degree, But here we have two things coming at once, which is really powerful. We have Jupiter on Tuliman or Bungula, projected degree, but we also have the Sun in Paran relationship with Tuliman. Tuliman is exactly, well, I can't show you it here, but is exactly on the lower meridian. So the Sun in this degree every year, according to your location, is connected to Tuliman in Paran manner. And here we have also the Sun at the midheaven, culminating with Tuliman, and we have Jupiter on the projected degree of Tuliman together. So this is, you can take this a day afterwards if you want the moon being more, more in Libra, whatever. But this is just for the example of having that, two planets, in a sense, combined in connection with one star. So that proved to be one of the most powerful Tuliman talismans that we made.
What's the effect of a Ptolemy talisman? What is it for?
Yes, well, it's reported to be a very Jupiterian Venus kind of essence. It's very bright stars. I think it's the second bright star, or the third. So we don't see it in the Northern Hemisphere so much. But this is one way of invoking it. And it's my experiences with it, because I've seen it on many, many charts, is that it lends a kind of an opening door into the mysteries in some way. That's not the classical aspect of that. There's many different views on it, but I guess that's also somewhat connected to that Scorpio thing. And it's also true to individual charts, but it's also, let's say, one example is Obama having Tuliman on his midheaven, which also may show stature and, and becoming prominent in what you do, and certain social power or a career kind of elevating power. But most of the charts that I've seen with this degree prominent, and even the 11th, depending on on different params, different locations, are people that are really deep researchers of philosophical insights and mysteries and magic and astrology. And I have a lot of, many years ago, I did a lot of research on that star for reasons that I won't come into right now. But I've seen that really powerfully invigorating the intellect, in the sense of opening a lot of powers of understanding and intuition. But there are many levels that you can aim at when you do a talisman for a fixed star. You can aim at the more psychological, spiritual level. You can aim at the more concrete manifestation level. I think they're all in some way accessible, also depending on the star phase and other elements in the chart.
Okay. Well, let's move on to some of our other questions. So Clifford, we wanted to talk about this. How do fixed stars have a different meaning in a talisman as opposed to the natal planet contact? The talisman purpose may not really be anything close to what it does in a natal chart.
Right. I started doing some deep dives to find out more lore about the fixed stars and discovered that the natal significations of the fixed stars of the Bohemians sometimes have no relationship whatsoever to the talisman, sometimes are the same, and sometimes are the literal opposite. So to give example, Algol, which everybody seems to be very interested in right now, Algol is a nativity. It presages, it foretells a decapitation, a public execution, blindness, or head injury. Even in elections, it's considered to be the most dangerous and terrible fixed star of all. But as a talisman, it's highly protective. It protects the members from being dismembered, and it reverses witchcraft upon those who send it forth. It's a protection talisman. That particular attribution comes exclusively from Agrippa, and there's a reason for that, which I can get to later. But Algol is not the only one where the talisman seems to be a reversal of its appearance on the nativity. Another one is Alpheka, or Elfria is also called it. If you have Alpheka on your ascendant, your nativity, you are fond of ornaments, flowers. You will have a tendency to be bisexual and promiscuous. And as a talisman, it makes you a friend of God and man, but chaste. Almost direct opposite. Another one that was an opposite was Pleiades. The Pleiades are malevolent stars. You do not want to have them on your ascendant. If you have them on your ascendant, you will be struck blind. But the talisman of the Pleiades gives you second sight, allows you to reveal secrets, and it preserves your eyesight and allows you to summon and presumably see demons and the spirits of the dead. Another opposite. Some are pretty much the same. Algorab talisman, the very fierce talisman, makes you start riots and be a backbiter and so forth. That's pretty much the same as it is in a nativity. And then there are others which just are WTF, where Procyon talisman does all these really great things. It preserves your health. It makes you likable to the spirits of the air and so forth. And if you have Procyon on your ascendant in your nativity, it gives you skill with the weapons of hunting, the lasso, the net, and the bow and arrow. There's no relationship there at all. It's very mysterious, but eventually I made a connection that is kind of revolutionary, I think. Almost all of the attributes of the Bohemian talismans do not come from astrological lore. They come from lapidary lore. The medieval and classical lapidaries list all of these magical gemstones in the usually not in the context of making talismans out of them, and those powers are almost identical to those which appear in the Quindecim Stellis. So that onyx, in the absence of any relationship with Alicorvia or Algorab, has all of those same attributes. Diamond is the gemstone you wear if you want to reverse witchcraft upon those who send it forth. And that appears even in the 200 BC De Mineralibus by Damigeron. It goes back that far. The connection between the minerals, the gemstones, and the fixed stars appears to have happened roughly around the time of the lapidary of Alfonso X Alsabio, who wrote this enormous lapidary text with thousands upon thousands of gemstones. And not only does he attribute them to fixed stars, but individual degrees of the zodiac, as well as constellations. And you find a lot of those interesting connections happening there. Now, the Quindecim Stellis precedes that by a long way, so there appears to be a strange relationship going back and forth between lapidary texts and astrological magic texts that take a degree of more precedence than the natal meanings for those fixed stars.
I think that's a really, I was really taken when you made that point earlier, and I thought about it, and I thought, here's the thing though, the qualities of a material object in the traditional view, you have occult qualities, and those occult virtues come from the fixed star spirits. So the fact that the onyx has that quality comes from the fact that the occult virtue of Algorab is in it, and Algorab rules that, so to speak. So it's really, I do think that's an excellent touchstone, but it's not saying that it comes from the onyx, right, in the traditional view, but it actually comes from the spirit. And the other thing I was thinking about with that you were talking about the opposites is that if you think about Algol, yes, it's got this tremendous force, but when it's a talisman, it's like an attack dog. So if I'm being attacked by an attack dog, it's malefic for me, right? But for the person who's being protected, that's very positive. So I think there's a lot of that going on too, that the positive and negative sides of the talismans, it makes sense that they would, you know, chastity and maybe being oversexed might well go together. You know what I mean? That those are two sides of the same coin. So, but I think you're really onto something. I was very much taken with that whole lapidary, you know, and the gem thing. And I think you're onto something with that. But in thinking about it, I realized, yes, it does indeed fit into that spiritual, you know, the angelic, you know, concept of it with the whole occult virtue and then the rulership.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about some of the talismans you've made. And then we've got charts for the stars that you've used. And I guess this question is more on the effects of these talismans, the end result, your end product. And then did you experience those results, or did the talisman create other desirable or undesirable effects or any surprises? So we'll start with Christopher's Draco talisman. Anything?
This is a really interesting talisman because this is a constellation talisman. And so that's kind of the cutting edge at the moment, because people are getting more and more into fixed stars, and constellations are sort of the new thing. And so as I was saying, constellation is made up of fixed stars. This is actually comes from Albertus Magnus, who was I believe 13th century natural philosopher who wrote on a whole variety of topics and is actually a saint. But he wrote a book called De Mineralibus, which keys in with this whole idea of lapidaries, and that has a lot of constellation talismans in it. So Draco is a great snake or dragon sort of coiled around the north, and included in this is also the Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Ursa Minor. And so on the front of the talisman, you can see there is Draco, and on the back you have the two bears. And these are actually circumpolar constellations. So for an observer in the northern hemisphere, they never set. And so that to me adds in an element of guidance of wisdom. So this talisman, it says, Albertus Magnus says, near the North Pole in heaven, there are pictured two bears, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. Between them is placed a twisting snake, Draco. And this gives wisdom and skill, increases cunning, adroitness, and bravery. So these, to do a just to mention the election briefly, the way I do constellation talismans is that I find what I call a marker star, which is somewhere in the middle of the constellation, and use that either rising or culminating. That's the point that I use. Other people will say use the beginning of the constellation. I've had other people say, oh, you should use the alpha star. Those all seem reasonable to me, but I kind of like using a star as a marker in the middle and then directly invoking the constellation. So the Draco, we just made these. We've just got them out. This is something I released about 2 weeks ago. So certainly I just think it's a gorgeous talisman. They're, again, as I said, available on my website. And I really like to focus on wisdom talismans. I think the greatest demand that I get is for wealth talismans. And then the second is for protection talismans. But it's important to me to have a good variety of talismans, like the Pleiades for magical skill, for invocation, and then also talismans for wisdom. So I'm really happy to have these Draco talismans, and sort of experimental. I mean, I certainly feel like the effect on me has been positive. I can't point to specific effect with it for me as yet. I've just got them. But certainly, you know, again, that's not always my focus, but certainly I'm looking forward to and excited about working with constellation talismans, because I think this is certainly a cutting edge area to be working with.
Good. It looks like you use the star Altaiz. Is that the star?
No, this one it's called, let's see, I'm not seeing the election. Whoops, for the election for that, It's a fixed star called Dziban, Dziban. It's at 14 Cancer
Oh, okay.
for currently, and you can see that's at the top at the midheaven right there.
Okay.
And so what I'm looking for is I'll look at the constellation and then look at because they'll list the stars and level of brightness and just try to find a star that's somewhat in the middle. I mean, constellations are huge. I mean, Draco extends across many, many degrees. So unlike a fixed star that's basically going to be at a specific point, at even minutes and seconds, a constellation is very broad. So that raises that issue of, okay, how do you elect for that constellation? And that's what's saying, that's what I use the marker star for. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I'm not invoking that star. I'm just using that as a location. So that's about the middle of the constellation. That's a good time to get him, get to contact him.
Okay. Well, you do happen to have a Draco star conjunct the sun too. So bonus.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can do all sorts of, look how far the sun is. Right?
From the midheaven.
That's huge. That's an incredible distance.
So concentrated on the celestial North Pole that stars extend from Cancer all the way around through Sagittarius and Capricorn. So it's just very intensely concentrated at the North Pole. So, and it's a huge curling constellation. It's the dragon, right? And there's a curl and twists and turns with this little tiny line of stars. So yes, it occupies a lot of zodiac. So
and that's that issue. That's you have to think about that with constellations. I seem to be doing lots of dragons and lions. So that's been my sort of my theme for this year. Is I've been doing all sorts of like Mercury lion, Sun lion, and I'm doing lots of dragons too.
Well, this was the Fomalhaut.
Oh, well, that's another weird one. So Fomalhaut is not one of the 15 fixed stars, but it is included in what's called the 4 royal stars. And the 4 royal stars, I'm not even sure where that comes from, but I think it's just too cool. I was trying to track down, it's in Robeson.
The Royal Persian Watcher stars.
Yeah.
They were on the equinoxes and solstices.
I know, but what's the source?
BC.
What's the source for that? I haven't been able to find a traditional source, but like I said, it's just too cool. So I'm not giving it up because I just think it's really, I'm flipping through here to find my Fomalhaut so I can talk about it. Okay, so Fomalhaut, I thought, as I was talking about, I think all fixed stars have a spirit and angel that you can interact with. They all have effects, they all have rulership, but don't have information about the 1,000 fixed stars except basically for the 15 fixed stars. So this is sort of the one step I've made, one of the few steps I've made outside of traditional sources, but I did rely on, for example, William Lilly talks about Fomalhaut giving you great honor, making you famous, and Fomalhaut is conjunct a important planet in my chart, so I have a personal connection to it. I also did a bunch of divination. So Fomalhaut is a star in the mouth of the southern fish, Pisces austrinus, and so that was kind of what I used as the motif. You can see the image here is of a fish. And then I did a sigil for it that's also sort of a fish-looking sigil that would kind of came to me. It was kind of, I can't really say I created it. I sort of manifested it. It was almost a sort of visionary act. And so it was exciting for me to sort of to see what I could do to step out and to have the 3 of the 4 royal stars, let's see, Regulus, Antares, and Aldebaran are all the 6 fixed stars, but Fomalhaut's the one that's not included. So I thought I'll do that, and also use Gabriel. You can see Gabriel at the bottom there as the angel to invoke in addition to invoking Fomalhaut. So I think it's been successful. Again, I'm less focused on specific effects from it. I do feel like the fame, also I think there's a spiritual guidance aspect to it, and I have felt that that's, I've been happy with it. And again, I haven't sold a ton of them, but it's a little bit more exotic, and it's also not for wealth.
Well, Fomalhaut, I believe, has a lot of charisma.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I don't know if that applies to me necessarily, if my charisma is increased, but I'm certainly working on it, and I can certainly use all the help I can get in terms of charisma. But so it's certainly one I've been happy with, and I do think it's exciting to start. I was like Michael's Talisman. And I think originally I think that the 15 fixed stars, the sigils and everything came through dreams and through visions. The magicians were given the stuff directly by the spirits of the planets and the fixed stars. And I really think it's great for people to start working with these and stepping. I love the 15 fixed stars, but it's nice to sort of expand beyond them. So that's sort of the examples I've given today. One, a constellation talisman, and one fixed star that comes outside.
This was Antares, and this one is one of the Royal Watcher stars as well.
Right. Now, Antares is also one of the spiritual protection talismans. I think it's for protection against demons, but it's also, I think, a general spiritual protection talisman. And this is one of the things that the fixed stars really, in our traditional sources, are really known for. If you look at the planets in traditional sources, they're really not much for enemy protection. Maybe Mars, but even that's more just because it's a sort of aggressive planet. But the fixed stars, we have a whole bunch of them that are specifically for different types of protection. Alkyd, for example, against thieves and assassins. Antares is demons. Algol reflects back incantations. So this is really one things that people are most excited about, getting fixed stars and working with them. Again, this is Antares. This is Cor Scorpionis, the heart of the scorpion, and is a pretty popular protection talisman. This one was made with Antares culminating and the moon making an applying conjunction. So a nice talisman, and again, all available on the Renaissance Astrology website if you're interested in talismans. So nice selection of talismans, and nice to talk about all the different things that you can do with fixed stars.
Wonderful. Okay, now this is Joshua's Venus Spica conjunction talisman election. And I see Venus and Spica are on the rising toward the ascendant.
Yes, definitely. And this is a really interesting situation because I did not want to make this talisman whatsoever. And I only did it because I have a good friend who's a, fellow practitioner, and they're like, you have to make this. You have to make this. It's Spica. I was like, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. Just sort of because I'm really more of in the camp of like wanting to use the moon as the transmitter of the fixed star energy. And this one was more of an experiment of made as a Venus talisman, but with a nod towards Spica being conjunct to the planetary body. And ultimately the reason why I did it was I was trying to recreate a talisman that was very, very similar to a talisman that was very similar to this, with a very similar election, except the north node was tightly conjunct the midheaven, and the moon was applying very strongly to Venus. And in this situation, we don't have that case. We actually have the moon separating from the main significator, which you would think, a benefic on the ascendant, Picatrix is saying, that's going to be a good thing. Who is the ruler of the moon? The ruler of the moon in this case is Jupiter in Sagittarius. Very well dignified. Certainly these beneficial things should compensate, one would think. There's so many good forces. However, for myself, this batch of talismans, for me and for my friend, are incredibly temperamental. They resist the desire to do anything, or wanting to do any sort of work, wanting to be around other talismans. There's a very tight contention that I feel, and that people who I've shared these with, it's definitely like, oh, something is off with these. We've double checked the materials and what they were made with to try to figure out, well, what went wrong, because in many ways I would say that there were certain less beneficial things in the prior election that I had made a year earlier. And in that one, I'm a singer of Indian classical music and Nepalese classical music. So I'm a lineage holder in Kirana Kayal singing, as well as Newar Buddhist Charya dance, and which is an esoteric Buddhist tradition. And so that was something that, I decided I was offered and had access to. I attribute because of this Venus talisman I made, and I made specifically for my singing aspirations. So I was hoping to, double down and get another one of those, because mine had broken. Mine had broke in that time. And so, if anything, I think this just goes to show you that everyone sort of has their own approach, and not one approach is going to fit everyone. Just because some of us are able to have really good effects with fixed stars, with planets, by, sort of mixing and matching and conjuncting them based on our own preferences. It doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And just because it doesn't mean that you should think, oh, I'm messed up. something is wrong with me, I should just give up. Try a different approach, and I think you'll find something that resonates. And if you're able to find something that resonates, then go for it, because there's more than one way to do this magic. And I think this is like a perfect example, because I think, if I just look at my 22 point checklist and try to optimize it, this hits a lot of those things. That being said, it's probably one of my biggest failures as a talisman that I can 100% point to and be like, this talisman did not work out for me. And, sometimes just the technical aptitude of making these talismans isn't enough. The practitioner plays a huge role. One's natal chart plays a huge role. I think also just your temperament in general plays a huge role. So I wanted to add this as that reminder. I was hoping to become, even more famous, a more famous singer and a spiritual practitioner. And the spirit was just like, I don't want to do anything. So now it just sits gently on my Venus altar.
Okay, so Clifford, this is a Procyon talisman election from 2017.
Yep. Yeah, this one's up on my website. I did a long coverage for this one. You want me to talk about the effects or the election?
The effects.
Okay. Yeah, well, that wouldn't have been on the website because I posted that shortly after I made them. Okay. Let's see. Various friends have complimented me since I started wearing them. Its properties are to make you likable by God and man. It seems to have contributed to a more carefree life. Let's see. My friends have said that I'm more amiable and empathic than usual when I wear this ring. And it's hard to prove a negative, but I credit much of my safety from COVID and immunity to a variety of other ailments to using this talisman, which preserves the health. Let's see. And I have a note here. Do not use talismans as a substitute for medical care. See your doctor. And only recommend talismans as complementary medicine so you don't get sued.
Okay.
Let's see. I believe that my Procyon rings have increased my magical abilities and protected me from magical harm. There is an ambiguity in the Latin text that it says power over magic, but it's unclear whether it says it's going to increase your magical power or have power over magic, which is done upon you. I'm kind of leaning towards the latter, but I'm still not sure. But either way, having more magical power and more protection, both really good things. And it's hard to prove a negative anyway. Yeah, so that's my experience with Procyon. Procyon's a really interesting talisman. The image of it in Agrippa are the three graces. The symbol of it apparently is meant to resemble a chicken footprint. Pretty mysterious, but definitely it's the most powerful talismans in the Quindecim Stellis. And it's also really good that the moon is so dignified because it's in Cancer. It's just really, really great for bringing you good fortune overall. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether the power is coming exclusively from the star or also the dignification of the moon. It's probably a blend of the two.
Maybe the chicken footprint is because Procyon is the heralder. It heralds the rising of Sirius and the rooster crows, Maybe that's...
Yes, that's a possibility. I've also noticed when wearing this ring, dogs love me. It's the lesser dog star, and it's true. It attracts dogs. They will not stop licking me. It's a little bit disturbing, but yeah, that's a good ring.
Excellent. Here is your second Pleiades talisman.
Okay. Yeah, this one. I sent this one by accident. It's not actually a very good election. I thought we were only going to be doing one election, and I basically ran through my archives, and I've made maybe Pleiades rings maybe 4 or 5 times at this point over the years. It's one of my favorites, and this is one that I'm pretty sure I'm glad I put aside because Chris will disagree with this. I don't like the fact that the moon's making a trine to Mars, and I don't like the fact that the Lord of the Ascendant is combust. But it didn't hurt me. The moon is extraordinarily fast. You get 14.5 degrees of daily motion. The moon's a little bit far away from Alcyone, but it's good enough. And let's see, where's Venus?
Venus is in the first house rising with Mars.
Okay, good. Yeah, because the moon sign ruler, I try to avoid keeping it cadent. The fact that it's in the first house is really great, and probably offsets the fact that you've got Mars there too.
And square Saturn.
Yeah, this is a messy election, but
Yeah.
you know, I every time I get an opportunity, I upgrade my talismans, and I also upgrade my electional criteria. And this probably was one back when I was not focusing so much upon the ascendant and a few other qualities that I've changed over the years. But I should talk to you about what I do with my Pleiades talismans, which are really cool. For me, let's see. My Pleiades talismans did include a substitution. We'll get to that later. But one of the consequences of that, I believe, is that my Pleiades talismans have done nothing for summoning the dead or demons. I don't summon demons anyway, but it doesn't do anything for summoning the dead, and that's probably because of the substitution. However, my doctors tell me that my eyesight is improving as I age. It says that the Pleiades talisman preserves the eyesight. It's improving my eyesight. That's amazing. That's spooky.
Hey,
Let's see.
Cliff, what do you mean by substitution? Tell us about that.
Well, we were going to get to substitutions later on because
okay.
You can go ahead and go with that because that's the next question. So.
Okay, so the Pleiades talismans and the Quindecim Stelis are the most problematic because one of the ingredients that you're supposed to put under the ring is mercury, quicksilver. That is very poisonous, and that's bad. I'm willing to take certain risks with my my magical operations, but that's a little bit too far. Also, I've never quite figured how to glue quicksilver under a ring. That makes no sense. So what I ended up doing was I theorized that the quicksilver probably had something to do with the visionary aspects of Pleiades talismans, that is the summoning of spirits. So I began to look for other herbs which might have visionary associations as well. I made a list of those, and I used tarot to select white poppy seeds. So all of my Pleiades talismans have white poppy seeds substituted for the quicksilver because, of course, the poppies produce opium, and that produces altered states of consciousness. And I mean, it doesn't do anything wrong, but it probably is the reason why it's not so great for summoning spirits. While wearing these rings, I get amazing insights. It's a talisman to reveal secrets. I accord some of my successes in deciphering certain things, like, for example, the lapidary lore, to the fact that I was wearing a Pleiades talisman while I was thumbing through my books. Other revelations of secrets have been really strange, where total strangers walk up to me and just tell me all their secrets. I didn't really ask for it. It was a bit surprising, but I connect it to my Pleiades talismans. In addition to that, it also reveals things. It helps you find things which are lost. I mean, in my case, it's mostly lost socks and occasional things around the house, but that's pretty cool too.
Would that be like with Merope, the missing sister?
Yes. The most useful thing about my Pleiades talismans is the conjuration of winds. And what I do is, and I'll discuss the ritual later on, is I do a petition while wearing a Pleiades ring before I have to make a journey by air. And I call upon the angel of the Pleiades to blow away storms in my path so that I arrive on time. And because of this, I've flown across the country in midwinter in February for many, many years to go to various conventions, and I was never late for 12 years straight. And that's the result of me working with my Pleiades talisman. I do a lot of weather magic outside the context of astrological magic, and this has amped up my abilities to an unbelievable level.
Cool. Okay, so let's go to some of the other panelists and talk about the difficulty of assembling ingredients for fixed star talismans, and then how do you decide on acceptable, available substitutes if you find that you have to? Anyone want to jump in?
I can definitely jump
Okay.
in because one of the first fixed star talismans I made was Capella, Capella the She-Goat, and I was very much inspired by this is when I was really a baby making talismans, and I was deeply inspired by Chris Warnock's Capella talismans that he had in his site. What is like cheerfulness is good fortune, and I just love that proverb. It's just perfect. Or cheerfulness is good health, and it's like I read it and I'm like, oh, this is 100% me. But if you look at Quindecim Stelis, like what does it say the materials are? It's like, oh, it's sapphire. And so like I think, what is it, I was like, I just graduated college, making some abysmal amount of money. It's like, how can you afford, brilliant sapphires? You can't. Uh, but I did look to the traditional text for inspiration, and what I noticed is definitely like within the lunar mansions, they talk about making talismans out of wax, and there's a lot of discussion, with stellar sorceries and other practitioners of, potentially maybe the hardness of the material can, like the softer of the materials or the least durable the materials, the quicker things will sort of manifest. And so I wanted to try that out. So I ended up making like these sapphire blue wax squares because I was making candles, talismanic like candles and like wax things at the time. So I sort of had the materials around. Um, and on that, I engraved images just like with they have like wax carving tools you can buy at the craft store. And I put out the images, the sigils of the, what was it? Like the sigil of Capella, a goat image as well, and then wrote my petition of what I wanted. Particularly, it was for health. Around this time, I was having like horrible chronic throat infections, and I would have to go to the ER like every 3 months, and no one knew what was going on. And for me at the time, wasn't making a lot of money. I was a contract worker. Like having to spend multiple days going down to the ER just would completely ruin me. So I desperately needed some health. Um, and so I found one of those elections. I was very lucky, just sort of, by the grace of the gods. Um, and Whorehound is also one of the materials. Thankfully, I was able just to order online with the magic of seed depositories, and I had that melt into the wax, and so it's solidified with the Whorehound inside of it. And I sort of mixed the materials in a bag, but I didn't use the sapphire like it said, so I was worrying what was going to happen. But as soon as I mixed everything together in the bag, I could definitely feel like this force, and deep within the meditation that I had done, definitely had this connection with Capella the she-goat. And I believe, Elizabeth, you helped me a lot try to figure out, like, well, what is Capella? Where can I find some lore? And you gave me, like, a very large, list of, like, oh, Capella, like fed Zeus when Zeus was, what was it, sort of abandoned when he was a baby. And so it was like, I could use some like, life-giving nectar. And the talisman lasted for about 2 years. I wasn't sick at all. And now I have chronic coughs again. It lasted for about like 2 years, and I'm desperately in need of a Capella talisman and a good Capella election. So if you think you have one, send it your way, and I'll trade you talismans and that sort of thing. But as far as like the ease of use to the effect, because I think there's a lot of like fear and like FOMO. I read all the time on Twitter, like astrological FOMO. Like I have to find the best election, and if I'm not doing electional astrology all the time and making talismans, I suck, or I'm missing out, or I'm not a real practitioner, or that I should only try to have like once in a lifetime effects from talismans, which I think I'm guilty of a little bit, because I like to talk about sort of lineage holder of two different singing traditions, esoteric Buddhist par excellence, and the only temple in the United States. I like those things, and I think it's a testament to what's possible, but also practically, like if I can just live life maybe 30% better, or at least in a way that I can work 30% less hard. And if I can get that through a talisman, then that's more than a success. And for me personally, as long as if I can connect with the spirit and develop a relationship with my life that makes it more meaningful, that's like the real win. So that 30% better doesn't have to be so transactional. It can just make it easier for me to handle the effect in whatever way that the spirit is willing to do it. But it's possible to have that, without the best election, without the traditional materials. You don't need diamonds and sapphires in order to have a very meaningful and powerful experience for your own life.
Michael, do you do substitutions at all?
Well, if I do need to do a substitution, then I might take elements that are connected with the planets, the planetary natures of the star. This is one thing, and sometimes I just want to show you something. Okay. This is a regular talisman that we did in Kagold, and here you can see, it's a kind of like I show you in the last panel. So here we placed. Now I don't remember. Sorry, I don't remember the name. This is the mastic, and this is
Looks like wormwood.
Wormwood, yeah, and garnet stone. And the election was on the solar conjunction to Regulus. So this is a kind of thing that we do. We take the canister. This is for Sirius, and we put the elements inside. So and if we don't find a certain herb, we we can take a herb that's connected with the planetary nature. I think that's the closest. But so this is another canister. This is for Spica. I have in my notes somewhere the herb, but it just disappears, so I don't remember them by heart. So and here I think we also Spica is sage, and Venus is, we put also jasmine inside, and we did the Venus Spica talisman. So in that way we blended both occult virtues together with those herbs inside. And sometimes we put the stone inside. We're now doing models which we put the stone outside, a little bit like this one. And this is just another, this is Jupiter Spica talisman without any herbs or anything. The depiction is Sala. She's a goddess of agriculture in the Babylonian tradition associated with Spica, because Spica has to do with fertility and kind of a very generative life power. And this is the Mercury Bungula one that we showed before. It's only Mercury's sigils here, but they're still very powerful. It's something that I think Chris said, and also Joshua said. I think most of the emphasis sits on the magician, and of course he's connected with that elected time, hopefully the most ideal possible. And the modifying the materials at that time with the intention is the most powerful thing. And of course, if the material is analogical to that planet and has the virtues, then it's better, of course. But sometimes you can only take a piece of metal and carve it, and you'll get an effect. It's not that these conditioned the talismans, and without these, the talisman is not effective. So I play with that, and sometimes I use traditional stuff. Sometimes I use other stuff. But really, I don't think we should put so much emphasis on that. So that's my take on it. And if I can, I just want to add something about the experiences with talismans, because I had one with other 4 people. We did that together in 2013. We did a talisman for Sirius, which was a conjunction of Jupiter and Sirius, which was really promising, because Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, and that's that exaltation degree, and that's probably connected traditionally. And it was really one of the most uplifting, ecstatic talismans that we made. We all felt it for a while, and then we all got burns. Everyone in different ways. We got burns sometimes, 2 or 3 times a week. And just then is when I remembered that he's called, Sirius is the scorcher. And I don't think he's a Venus nature like Ptolemy said. I think he's a Mars-Jupiter nature. He's very, very fruitful and life-enhancing and generative, and he has a lot of healing energy, but he also has kind of a solar, martial, burning quality, and you can really feel it. It's really physical. So I couldn't wear it anymore, because I'm already too much of a hot temper astrologically for that. So that is just my 2 cents with an experience really also echoed from other people that did the talisman with me together. So that's kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, I have Sirius listed in my book as a Jupiter-Mars star. I don't know where the Venus comes from, but Jupiter, Mars, it has that aggressive side because it's a dog, right? It's a dog star. And it's the scorcher, as you say, it's got a very Marsy side to it. So let's, wrapping up here. What are preferred primary resources, books, anything that you can recommend to participants about the books? Christopher, go ahead.
Another plug. Yeah, this is my book on fixed stars. This actually is a hardcover version. You can get it directly from my website. It's got color pictures for everything, so that's kind of cool with all everything's in color. So that's kind of nice. What I tried to do is to summarize all the main fixed star sources, and of course, like with Cliff is kind of come up with new stuff. I'd love to stick that in there. I think Cliff did a really good job of talking about the main sources that we have for fixed stars, and certainly the Hermes on the 15 fixed stars is really the key source. Everything else is kind of subsidiary to that. And Picatrix only has one fixed star in it, so that's not really the big source. Normally you'd be looking at Picatrix, and everybody basically depends on Hermes on the 15 fixed stars. And there's certainly lots of modern stuff out there. It's interesting to take a look at, but it's specifically focused on astrological magic. Again, you got to be careful you're not getting a source that's just natal, because that can kind of throw you off for the astrological magic. But it's still useful to figure those things out. And I was going to say about Sirius. See, I had a different experience with that. I had a problem with the government where I was essentially being prosecuted, and I did Sirius for a year. Every day, and I got a really good result with that. And so there was very peaceful and very much of reconciliation, which is exactly what the traditional source says, which I think just points up the fact that if I say this is what Sirius is, that's what's true for me, right? And that everyone, there's often a wide variety of experiences about stuff, because it's certainly, I don't doubt for a second that Michael and those people had that experience with it. So that's just something to keep in mind, is that we're sort of in the experimental phase of this. We can look at our traditional sources. As I said, Hermes on the 15 fixed stars is great. There's a lot of other subsidiary stuff. And then also direct experience. I mean, what we're doing, all of us have had really amazing experiences. I was totally blown away really by the quality of the elections, by the talismans that we saw, and then everyone's experiences. So I've just been so happy to be here today, and I want to thank everybody for such
Before we wrap up, there was a request in the questions in the chat box to have contact information. Why don't all of the panelists type in your website or your contact information for those who might be interested in acquiring talismans from you, or whatever other services are available, so that you can, reach out to people that are interested in getting talismans or getting more information about them from you, so that you guys have your websites and whatnot in the chat box for people to have access to. Michael, what kind of resources are you preferring at this point, whether it's for fixed stars or other talismanic work? You're muted.
Well, I do work with Kagold, and we create talismans together. So they have a site, and you can go in there. I am planning to open a course on astral magic, on the philosophy and practice. That I already planned to do it like 6 months ago, and then things in my personal life has dragged it along. So that might be happening soon. I still don't have a date for that, but if you're interested in that, then you can contact me, and then I'll send you all the info when I have it.
Okay, put that in the chat box, please. Type that into the chat box when you have a moment.
Yes.
So that your site's linked up there.
Yeah, my site is in Hebrew now, but I'm working on an English site for a while. So that hopefully will be up also.
Okay.
But I'll put my contact information in the chat box.
That'll do it. As long as there's a way for people to get in touch with you. Clifford, do you want to shoot out some books or resources?
Sure. I work mostly off of the Liber Hermetis, which appears off of Chris's website. I'm probably responsible for that being reloaded for 100,000 times at this point. But I use supplementary sources from Agrippa, from Ficino, and from the Confessio Amantis. The Confessio has some alternate herbs in there, so those are interesting to experiment with. But I mostly lean towards the Liber Hermetis version, which Chris has his own website. I've only occasionally used some of the Agrippa sigils. I like the more complexity of the Liber Hermetis ones.
Mm-hmm. We were talking about the Jupiter North Node talisman of a month or so ago, and it's so hard to get it. I think I did one in 1994 or 1995 when Jupiter was in Cancer with the North Node. Getting them together is all but impossible, and that one was in Agrippa.
Excellent. Yeah, I've tried to experiment with nodal talismans. I haven't created anything particularly successful yet, but I liked that Pleiades one with the North Node on the ascendant as a supplementary force.
Yes, yes. Excellent. Josh, any books that you are looking at that are helpful to you that are out in addition to what has been mentioned?
Oh gosh, what is it? I really like, because I also have this, because I'm also a Buddhist, and in Nepal there's so many Hindus. I also have a penchant for those sort of things. So I read a lot of, like, Ernst Wilhelm has a translation of, like, the Virat, I forget the Sanskrit name, but called Graha Sutras, and I'll read that, and I think I find it very, very helpful just to get sort of a different side and understanding of, because they talk about the planets, like the avatars of these planets, and to be an avatar, you're also incarnated as a human, so it sort of like dials down the level of spiritual perfection, I think, in a way that makes maybe their attributes a bit more accessible or understandable in an oblique way, in order to see what these sort of planets and stars could potentially be used for. I highly recommend the lapidary text that we've been talking about. I'm trying to hunt down a copy of Alfonso X myself, but I use, the one by Demedron, and then there's another one that Cliff was mentioning. I highly recommend.
I forgot that. I apologize. This is Demedron.
Virtuous Stones.
This is the Petersburg Lapidary, actually my favorite.
That's a great one.
Leonardi's Speculum Lapidum. Lapidary of King Alfonso X El Sabio, and the Book of Minerals that Chris used a lot for his constellation.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think if you can find that sort of lore of the lapidaries, I think it really cracks open a whole other way for experimentation, or at least that's where I'm at in my practice.
Right. Well, I would encourage any participants who have interest in this to join us on Stellar Sorcery Group on Facebook, because we discuss a lot of this and get into some really deep, really wonderful discussions about different kinds of talismans, whether it's fixed stars, lunar mansions, planets, constellations. We kind of hop, skip, and jump around with the topics. I would thank all of the panelists. This has been wonderful. And thank you all the participants from coming. The video for this will be posted in a handful of weeks. So, keep your astrological panels at gmail.com if you want to ask about the video or where the link is. That will be out probably in a handful of weeks. So I thank everyone very much, and we're going to wrap it up here. SMART is going to be hosting a January prediction panel on January 22nd or 23rd. I think it's the Saturday or Sunday, and we will have announcements about that. So if you go to Meetup or Facebook, the SMART group is listed there, and you can hook up, and if you want to attend other kinds of events. SMART is a chapter of NCGR, and we do a lot of different things. So please feel free to connect with all of us, and if you're interested in more information, but certainly the Facebook groups are one way to get access to people. So I thank everyone, and I appreciate you coming today.
We'll be doing this again, won't we?
I do hope so.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so don't leave before I do, guys, because I got to turn off the recording. Here we go.
Sure.